at CBS 7, I mean, in my first year, I actually cried one time. It's like really embarrassing to say, but it was really bad and really, a moment where I think I could have quit or something. And so, I mean, honestly, there's like hundreds of those moments, but I think a lot of it is determination and hard work.
Welcome to the Next Level Journalist, where you will hear from some of the best journalists in the business or who have been there, done that, and willing to share with you what they've learned so you can get better, faster.
My guest today is someone I've known since 2008. We crossed paths at KOSA TV in Odessa, Texas. I was the weekend sports anchor at the time. He was a news reporter. He's made multiple stops since then, collecting all kinds of awards on his way as he climbed the market ladder. He's no longer in the business, though, and we're going to talk about that with Beau Berman. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your experiences, your advice, your tips, all the above.
Hey, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here and talk about all of it.
Well, let's jump right in, Beau. Like I said, you and I crossed paths in Texas. Give us an idea of what your career journey has been like from the moment that you knew that you wanted to do this, where you went to school, up to what you're doing today in a Cliff Notes version, if you can.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like, this could be a really, really long story because it spans, over 11 years, or I'll do my best to condense it. And so, yeah, I mean, I, was always better at writing and speaking than math. And so that kind of guided me into journalism. I also had a cousin who was significantly older than me, like 20 years older, almost 30 years older, who had been a TV reporter in Dallas, Texas. And so I think without that role model, I probably never would have thought of this as a career possibility. It just never crossed my mind. But, hey, if I had an uncle who was like an offshore driller or a, world-class pianist, I think that those careers, so a lot of life, unfortunately, or fortunately, how you look at it is, based on role models and what you see in your life. But so anyway, got into, majored in broadcast journalism at Penn State. And I wanted to be a sports reporter. I wanted to do what you did at KOSA TV in Texas. I wanted to be the sports guy, ESPN anchor was my lifelong dream. But somewhere along the line in college, I just realized, my sort of pragmatic take on it was to give up on my dream. I decided, oh man, there's just too much competition in sports, and we've talked about this before, I think on my podcast, but it's, sports is much more competitive than being a general assignment news reporter. So, you better be really passionate if you're going to pursue that, because it can mean, again, working on weekends, so many different things, and also just less jobs to go around. Because we've talked about this, and, there's only, 2 to 3 sports jobs at a station, whereas there's like, 10 to 15 news jobs, if not more, if you count anchor and producer. So I decided to switch gears, and I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue being an investigative reporter, but you can't just do that out the gate. You have to start as a general assignment reporter. And so that's what I did. And so, I took that first job in Odessa, Texas, and, packed my Toyota Camry and drove all the way down to Odessa. And then, after 3 years and 3 months, not that I was counting at CBS 7, I kind of got lucky there. I was nurtured by the news director, Jose Guyona. And I feel like he poured a lot of information and belief into me, like he did a lot of us. And so I kind of hit it big with one particular investigative report that he let me do, or that I pursued, that took months and just a lot of hard work and some luck. And, and that story won, Edward R. Murrow Award. So that was kind of my launching pad. Okay, now I'm going to pitch myself as an investigative reporter. So I took a job in Hartford, Connecticut, and moved up there. So made the drive from Texas to Connecticut, and started as like a hybrid investigative / general assignment reporter. And I felt a little out of place. I mean, somebody even made a comment about my age. At the time, things hadn't shifted as much as they have now, where now you can really get a job in a top 40 market, at like age 24. But even back then in 2011, it was still a little bit more rare. So I was like 25, 26, and people were kind of scoffing at me a little bit, like, oh man, you're so young. What are you doing here in market 30? So that was a little bit tough mentally. And I was kind of like sad for the first few months, and really had that crisis of imposter syndrome, where I felt like, do I belong here? But, I just kind of kept my head down and did what I know how to do and worked hard. And, within a couple of years, I was getting Emmy nominations and won another 2 more Edward R. Murrow awards. And, felt like I was producing good content for the most part and, working really hard, getting up early, staying there late, just, pouring my heart into it because I felt like I had to prove myself and had a chip on my shoulder. And so then for family reasons, my mom got really sick and I knew she wasn't going to last much longer. So I knew that I had to leave Connecticut and go back home to Western Pennsylvania. So I left the TV station in Hartford in 2015. I had 6 months left on the contract, but at that point, family over everything. So the contract didn't matter. And I just politely let them know I had to leave, and they were really good about that. And so I went back to Pittsburgh and, I did need to make some money. So I was planning on being maybe a waiter or something at a restaurant if I had to temporarily, and maybe applying for freelance, but got really lucky. And there was a job opening at a station where I'd interned like 10 years earlier. And things just moved really quickly and they hired me like right away. So got a full-time job immediately. I did have to take a step backwards. I'd been the weekend anchor and investigative reporter in Connecticut. And going to Pittsburgh, they didn't have those roles open. So I had to take a step backwards and be a general assignment reporter pretty much purely. And so I was in Pittsburgh for 4 years, and it was really cool to work in my hometown. And after that, it's interesting in this career, journalism, it's sort of a blend of, family and your experience and how things are going and your emotions. And, when you're younger, you don't realize how big the family issue will play a part eventually, whether it's a parent or someone you fall in love with or fall out of love with or what have you. But in my case, I did fall in love with somebody and it was a long distance relationship, but, we wanted to be together. And so, the ultimate thing was that we were moving to an area in central New York where there isn't a TV station at all. The closest one is an hour away. And so then, it kind of became, do I want to commute an hour and work in a very small market again, which I had sort of graduated out of and, paid my dues to get away from. Small markets are great, but, there's a time and a place for it. And if you're from the town, it's a lot better, I think. And so anyway, I decided to kind of shift gears for a while and, or maybe permanently, and get into marketing and public relations and use, video editing skills and social media skills in a different career. So I'm sitting right now in the offices of a startup, a nutrition startup here, like just a couple minutes from the Cornell University campus. And I was invited to join the team as a co-founder of the company, essentially. I mean, we're still in the early stages. So I didn't literally found the company, which started a couple years ago, but we're so young that the scientists involved wanted someone who could be the public face of the company and really handle social media and marketing, everything top to bottom that they didn't want to spend, couldn't spend time on. And so that was a great offer for me. And so here I am.
You kind of alluded to some of it, but I'm going to let you speak to, what you're doing today as far as how you're using what your past experiences provided you with to today and, being an entrepreneur, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, look, whenever you're applying for jobs cold after like 11 years in journalism, it can actually be very frightening. And I had a little bit of that and a little bit of self-doubt because you go on a job board and if you're looking at jobs not in journalism, a lot of times it says we want 5 years of marketing experience, 5 years of PR, 10 years of, graphic design. And I don't have that. I have some overlapping skills for sure. And I think I have some really good skills, actually, if people meet me or, see what I can do when it comes to research, meeting deadlines, working under really, really high pressure conditions, writing, which can apply to copywriting and, all sorts of things, headline writing. And the thing about being a former journalist is we're used to writing headlines and things that are really catchy and short. And that's a lot of what copywriting is when you're writing for, as a marketer or something to that extent. But then also, video editing, Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro. Now I use, online based editing software mostly called WeVideo, which I've fallen in love with. but video editing, and then also on camera appearance. And so these are skills that it's interesting. I think after a decade in journalism, we start to take them for granted sometimes in a weird way, like, oh man, those don't apply to anything except for local news. But the reality is, you walk into a different space and people are really impressed that you can deliver on camera with basically no practice, and ad lib something and make it sound credible and believable and confident. They're impressed that you can edit a video in an hour, and make it seem pretty darn professional just right off the jump, for me, it was about like a little bit of struggle initially, thinking, okay, I have to, I want to find a job outside of news for now. What am I going to do? But you have to be confident about those skills and really market yourself. And some of it, is a little bit of slight exaggeration, or basically just playing up your strengths and downplaying your weaknesses. And if you're confident enough, and if you believe in yourself, and know that you'll do a good job, as long as you can get yourself in the door, that's when you can, study and get better and work quickly to improve. So sometimes I feel like I'm winging it. And then other days I feel really good. Like, man, thank goodness I have the media savvy that I do. So recently I put out a press release, for example, to media across New York, newspapers, TV stations, and was able to garner some media coverage for our company, just from a cold press release, unsolicited. And 24 hours later, the TV station was doing a 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. report about our company. So it all came from a press release. But press releases are actually pretty old school and generally not a good way to get media attention unless you really know how to write them and know something that is going to catch a TV station's attention. And so, if you've been in this business for a decade, you kind of know that, that 99% of them are garbage, but there's 1% that you're like, oh, hey, that's really different. That's really different. And that would make a good story. And then it's the small things. It's about writing in the email, hey, we're available for a Zoom call anytime and we can provide B-roll. So I think those are two key components. So I essentially filmed my own news story, like 10 minutes worth of B-roll, sent it to the station, and pretty much, produced my own interview as well. And then the reporter did a package on it that aired at 10 p.m. And so for us, that's huge because, in marketing, there's paid, owned, and earned media. And so that was considered earned media because we didn't pay for it and it wasn't on one of our properties like our website. So earned media is what you're going for because it's, the best bang for the buck, and that's what we were able to get.
I love hearing about these transferable skills. You know what I mean? Like, I know I've experienced them too, but to listen to you, basically lay it out for anyone who sees this, that's great stuff, Beau. What would you credit your success to? Whether it be the success today, and obviously we'll, determine that definition, differently. But you talk about the awards you won. A lot of people would love to just have one of those awards, and you've won multiple. What would you credit your success to? Let's just focus on, as a journalist, when you were in there in that day-to-day grind, what made you successful and great at what you did?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to boil it down to one thing. It's basically impossible because the truth is that, all of us are this fabric of so many different threads that, we get from so many different places. So to say that it's just one thing, would not be an authentic answer. So, part of it was, to be honest with you, just the privilege of, being born into the situation I was born into, which I don't like to say that. That's kind of uncomfortable, but I was born into a situation where, I certainly wasn't rich. I wasn't even like upper middle class. We were a lower middle class family, but I did have a cousin who was a reporter. And so that singular influence of seeing someone related to me who I knew would be a mentor and provide that example of a career path, was gigantic. That's number one. Okay. And then, I guess along with privilege was also the fact of like, I had a parent who was willing to, who bought me a car, a used car when I graduated college, and drove with me down to Texas and helped me set up an apartment. And so I guess I bring that up because I remember our first news director, Jose, I once said to him, man, like, why did you take a chance on me from, all the way from Pennsylvania to come all the way down here? And he was like, well, I like, taking a chance on people. And he basically segued the conversation and brought up, though, the fact that it's really hard for him to find minority job candidates, and Hispanic and Latinx and Black and Asian job candidates, because sometimes people just can't afford to make those decisions to, buy a car or pay for the apartment rent and move and stuff like that. So anyway, there are some good agencies working towards that. The Emma Bowen Foundation helps minority journalists get into the business, but that's kind of a tangent. So, but step one is, I have to admit and recognize that I was, had a good situation that I was in. But then number two, on top of that, was like a lot of goddamn hard work, excuse my language. So a lot of really hard work. And, I tell people, there were times where I was at Penn State in college. It was a Wednesday night. My friends were like ordering chicken wings and drinking and watching football, or maybe it was a Monday night. And I had to go shoot a story by myself, and carry the tripod and the microphone and the lights and the camera. And, there was I didn't have a car at that point. So I'm walking like a mile. It starts pouring down rain. I just remember that moment thinking like, I really wanted to just say, F this, like, I'm just not going to do this. But I did it. I went and did it. And I was really miserable, like cold, shaking, wet, like just disgustingly miserable. And, there was no immediate payoff. The story ended up not even turning out that well. But, part of it is just there's these hoops you have to go through and these hurdles. And they're kind of tests, And, at CBS 7, in my first year, I actually cried one time. It's like really embarrassing to say, but, as like a tough guy, but I cried, after a story. There was a really tough situation where we were supposed to go live and get video of an airplane that was landing at the same time at the airfield. And it was impossible to do both. But at that time in my career, I didn't realize, you have to just make a decision and pick one, or, tell your producer. And I tried to do both, and I was like running and sprinting. And then I went on air and I was out of breath and I couldn't talk and I started choking. And, then the news director called and yelled at me, and I just like started crying like privately, but it was really bad and really, a moment where I think I could have quit or something. And so, honestly, there's like hundreds of those moments, but I think a lot of it is determination and hard work. And then finally, number three is that for whatever reason, I think I assumed that there were a lot of people doubting me over the years, and when you start in journalism, you get paid so little. And I think there's people that think you're crazy. Like, why are you doing this? You could have done a different career. You could have been an insurance salesman. You could have been a lawyer. You could have been this or that, a doctor. And I always looked at it like, okay, I have a huge chip on my shoulder. Like, I have to prove people wrong. This is like something I'm made for. I can do this. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going. And I just had this chip on my shoulder. Like, when something went wrong, I was just like, I have to make it right, and I'm going to succeed, and there's no one that can stop me. And I just always kept that attitude. And frankly, sometimes I think I probably came off as like a little bit weird or quiet in the newsroom, or like avoidant, because I was just so laser focused on succeeding. Like, sometimes people would be chit-chatting about, the weather or their vacation plans. And oftentimes I refused to do it. And, I might've looked like a jerk or, isolated or something, but part of it was that I just wanted to be doing research on the next story, or, just keeping my head down, and kind of felt like I wasn't there to make friends. And that's such a weird attitude, but, and thankfully I did make a lot of friends in the industry. But I think, it's just a blend of a lot of these things, and curiosity as well, the curiosity and passion to stick with it.
What might be, if you can look back on some of the best advice you were given, either before you got into the industry or even while, maybe you were in the industry, maybe the first thing that comes to mind, or if it's multiple things that come to mind, advice wise that you were given?
Advice wise, I think one of the most important things, people always say this, and it's kind of a boring answer, but, is that writing is really important. And so, I've seen people get into the industry and they might be like really attractive or really good on camera, but if they can't write, and their grammar's weak, or they're just like writing really bad stories, and it really hampers them, and it's going to really put a ceiling on their career. So a low ceiling. So I think writing's important. In terms of advice, it's hard to think of something right now, but I got a lot of great advice. A piece of advice that I kind of just learned myself was to stay out of gossip. And I think that was really big for me, because there's a lot of gossip in newsrooms of, who's dating who and who's doing what and who's leaving and who's in trouble. And it's really tempting to get involved in it. And sometimes you could argue that it's good to stay up on it, because then you kind of know what's coming down the pike in the newsroom and you can prepare yourself. But for me, it was better to stay out of it, because it just kind of made me a lot less stressed out, at least in that realm. So that was one thing. But I don't know. Another thing in terms of writing stories was, my cousin did tell me once, he said, always put a face on the story. And that was really helpful to me, that like every story has to have a face. And what he meant by that is like, there has to be a character, like someone that the viewer can connect with. And so, a story about people's pipes freezing in the winter, it's really not that interesting unless you find, an 81-year-old man who is freezing in his home and, did everything he could to prepare for this, but it still went wrong and the city's not helping him. And now he's crying on camera. And, you can really turn any story into something really personal and emotional if you have a character, if you have a face on that story, and you have to lead with it. It has to be mentioned, in the first part of the story. You can't just introduce the person at the end, because by then it's just too late. No one cares. But if you make people connect with someone in any story, storytelling, then I think they care more. So that was a piece of good advice, at least for putting together stories.
What do you think separates the good journalists from the great journalists? I mean, it's kind of obvious who, if they get it right away or not. But when it comes to, just being a good one to a great one, do you think they're defining, traits, or what comes to mind that you think, you look back on and just seeing how you developed into, someone who just started out to someone who was collecting, awards in mid to major markets?
Once again, it's tough to boil it down to one thing. I mean, I think it kind of comes down, part of it is sort of like intelligence, and that's probably not a popular answer. But what I mean by that is that sometimes people think that like, oh, if you're in the media, you're not that smart. Like you're just like there to be on camera and look pretty or something, or, you're good at talking, but you're not good at math. So you're not intelligent. But I think actually some of the greatest journalists I've seen are pretty intelligent, and maybe they got that way from studying a lot, how to write, or researching research techniques. But so I think being smart about what you're doing and actually having a plan is really important, as opposed to just kind of showing up and phoning it in, or just following what everybody else does, and kind of having the herd mentality. So that's one thing. Another thing is truly, it's so cliche, but truly just perseverance and just determination to succeed and tell people stories and get the information out there. I mean, in my career, I had so many times where actually the boss told me, nah, this story's not going to work. And I just refused to hear it. And that takes like a lot of courage to stand up against the person who signs your paychecks. But, for me, it was like bigger than the paycheck. It was like, look, even if I get fired, I guess I'll find another job. But like, this story really matters. These are real human beings that we're reporting on. And this is crazy, like this thing that I've discovered, and it needs to be told. And if I don't do it, probably no one else in the world is going to do it. And sometimes I actually thought that, and it was actually true. If you're in a small market and no other reporter knows about this thing, and they're not going to find out about it, and you know about it, if you don't do that story, it's quite possible that no one's going to do it. And that was always a really driving force for me, that like, this is the difference between silence or exposure, this thing being exposed. And oftentimes it needs to be exposed. Like you might change someone's life. And so, not to be dramatic, but that was, something that drove me. So I think the passion to have that perseverance and determination to fight for stories. And I think there's a quote in like All the President's Men where, or maybe it's Woodward and Bernstein, but there's a quote about like, all of the best stories are the ones that you have to fight for. And it's really true. The stories that I've won awards for, in almost every case, I had to fight for those stories. And fight means like argue with the boss and, demand time to work on it. And, when they tell you it sucks, to be humble and okay, ask them what needs to change about it, but, to fight for that story to air. And so I've had that happen multiple times, and those are always the best ones. It's crazy. And it really is frustrating that you have to fight against your own employer to be able to do a story that deep down is an amazing story. But that's just the way it is. There's competing interests, and sometimes people don't see the vision, the way you see it. So yeah, I think, being intelligent and smart about what you're doing, being dedicated and determined to get it done. And probably 3 is just being intensely curious, because you really can't fake that. And so there's some journalists who are in it and they're not really curious. They're just kind of like, this is cool. I like being on TV, and, I get paid, and great. Maybe I'll move up one day and be in a bigger TV station. But there's a difference between the journalists who are actually curious, about their subjects, and like, it doesn't mean, I was kind of shy and still am sometimes, a mix of like extreme outgoing and extreme shyness. But I think just being curious though is the important factor.
I love that last one there. And you touched on this next question a little bit, but some challenges that you can recall. Like I said, you mentioned a challenge about, facing your employer about, a story, but talk about some of the challenges that you faced, as a journalist, how you handled them, how you approached them, how you overcame them.
Sure. I mean, one challenge for me was that I was always late. I mean, it's funny. One of my, our coworkers back at CBS 7, Eddie Garcia, he was the same way. We were always late. We were always late to work, which, I mean, I think a lot of people would say we were both like really, really good reporters and pretty unique talents, but for some reason we couldn't get our stuff together, and we were like always 5 to 10 minutes late. And so it wasn't a good look. It was not good. I will say that both of us always stayed late as well, though. We were always there like at least half an hour past when we could have left the building, sometimes an hour or 2 hours late. Sometimes I stayed there till 3 a.m. and people never knew that. But there were many times where I slept on the couch in the studio, not all night, but for a few hours, and then got up at like 6 a.m. and drove home. And so why was I doing that? Well, the answer is I was putting together resume tapes, and working on resume tapes. And there really wasn't a time to do that during the day. And it was also kind of very awkward if you were putting together a resume tape and people saw you doing it. So I would stay really late. And so I became friends with this overnight producer, Gary Hinterlong, who would see me there at 3 a.m. And so we developed an acquaintanceship or a friendship because I was often there so late. But so, I mean, that was one struggle, just, being punctual. And I'm not proud of it, but yeah, I was often late, but I tried to make up for it in other ways. And so I think that's my answer, is that I stayed late, worked really hard when I was there, and constantly tried to get there a little bit earlier. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But other struggles were, finding story ideas was really hard early on. It was really, really hard. And organization for me was hard, because I think, that's part of the reason I'm always late, is because I'm more of a creative. I'm not like a accountant type of person. I'm a creative. And so as a reporter, you're kind of blending a lot of those things, because you do have to look neat and nice on air, and you do have to be very detail oriented, or else you can literally get sued. But it's not a natural position for a creative, but I think that's more of what I am. So, I don't know. I think, I do, when I was growing up, I did tend to be around some people, like I was alluding to earlier, a bit shy, and then among other people, extremely outgoing. And as a reporter, or as a journalist, you have to step out of that shell. You just have to. And, I dramatically changed, in terms of my interpersonal skills in 10 years of, just going from someone who really hated and avoided conversations with strangers. And I still don't love them, but now I can definitely do them and be really successful with them. And, not only can I talk to people, I can convince them of things. And so there we go. That circles back. It's another skill of basically salesmanship. Of, if you're a journalist, you have to be able to convince people to talk to you and do interviews with you. And it's so much like selling. You're just selling yourself, and you're selling the story idea. And so, for people who do get out of the business, it's easily transferable to a sales career.
So you touched on the challenge of finding stories early on. How do you develop that skill? Is there something that you can do to help you, develop the ability to find stories?
I guess it does become a skill. I think part of it, it's so much of it is just time, honestly, and just getting a feel for the types of stories that the news director and viewers want. Because when you go in, you just have no idea. And really, the types of stories that are going to be accepted, especially as a general assignment reporter or even a sports reporter, the type of stories that will be accepted by your management team, because it's all for naught if you're just spinning your wheels if you're putting a ton of time into finding a story and then management hates it, because then you're just not going to do it. So it goes against what I said earlier about fighting for a story, but you have to know which ones to fight for and which ones to let go. And so it's only, one in every 200 that you're going to fight hard for. And then the other ones you just have to let go. So in terms of the skill, for me, it was really just about like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks in terms of my attempts to try to find stories. So back in 2008, doing a lot of Google News searches and setting up automated news searches for Odessa, Texas. So I was being emailed, any news article that came up, even blog posts that had Odessa in the word. And so I also got posts for like Odessa, Ukraine and Odessa, Michigan or something. But it did help, because occasionally I would find blog posts, that someone wrote, and I was like, oh man, this hasn't been covered yet. This is crazy. So, it's really, I think a lot of it's actually creativity. I would say that's the number one thing, is you have to be willing to do the cliche of think outside the box and just be super creative and not, down, not be down on yourself for having a different idea. And if you think like everybody else, you'll deliver like everybody else, the same old story. But if you think differently, you'll produce differently. And ultimately in TV news, people are afraid to be different. But the reality is if you're different, that means you're good because you're doing, you're setting yourself apart, and those will translate into exclusives. And that was like, I got the biggest natural high off of having an exclusive story especially at my first market. Well, no, actually really all along. Because it was such a good feeling. It meant that you had something that nobody else had, and you were leading the market. You were doing something incredibly unique. And so that was such a good feeling versus when you go out and do the same story everybody else does.
That's good stuff, Beau. I'm going to have two last questions for you. They're going to be a little more fun too. So you've already been transparent throughout this whole thing, which I love. So I appreciate your transparency in this. When you talk about, how you got emotional when your news director went off on you. But what, and that might be the answer to this question, but what, when you look back, was the most embarrassing experience that you may have had during your time on TV or just in the TV industry?
It's pretty crazy because there's literally like 50 to 100 embarrassing moments in 10 years, which I almost don't even want to think about them because they were really embarrassing, and it's the type of thing where it's like, if you're a sports fan, they talk about, a quarterback who throws 4 interceptions on Sunday has to have a what do they call it? Like a short-term memory. Like you can't take that into the next game. You have to like wipe the slate clean and start over. And news and journalism and sports journalism are so much like that, because if you dwell on your mistakes and your embarrassing moments, you're kind of screwed. You have to be able to move on, and it's really hard. Because you sometimes take it home with you and you feel like an idiot. But I've had instances where I've been in blogs. I've been in news blogs, TV News Live or FTV Live, where, the producer never gave me a cue and my IFB earpiece wasn't working for some reason. And so they took me live on air and I was just standing there, for a good 30 seconds doing nothing. And that's embarrassing. And then, when you're not on camera, or when you don't realize you're on camera, you may mess with your hair or touch your face and you look like an idiot, and then the worst part is it's not even your fault in that case. It was like someone never cued you, your equipment's not working. So that happened like right before I left Pittsburgh, and that was like pretty embarrassing to some degree. I've done it all. I've done almost every embarrassing thing you can do. And it's, I've had typos in news stories that were pretty important. I have, I try to avoid these things and I try to learn from them. But I've been called into the news director's office time after time for things that I did that they perceived to be wrong, and in some cases were wrong. I've accidentally recorded police officers on Facebook Lives that the police then later got mad about and criticized me for, probably deservedly so. That was a total accident, but looked really, really nefarious and bad, even though it was an accident. Just stuff like that. It's just crazy. And I felt very guilty at times, So I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But, I think a lot of people have. And, I think, the bulk of the work I've done in my time in the business was really, really good, 95% A+ material or A material. And then there was some bonehead mistakes, and that's just part of the process.
Yeah. Anyone that says otherwise about not making a mistake, that's why we go to those small markets, right? Go down there, get our mistakes out of the way, but you'll still make them. My last stop, I remember I did what you said, when you said you were out of breath on air one time, I made that mistake of running onto the set and I about passed out. I had a choice to either stop and catch my breath and tell the viewer what I was trying to do, or pass out. And I was like, well, I'm not going to have that blooper on my reel. So,
right. Oh my goodness.
Anybody tells you otherwise is lying.
Yeah.
Okay. With that said, the highlight, if you could look back, or highlights of your time in TV, what stands out to you? Some of the greatest, fondest memories that you have and experiences, or, whatever comes to mind as, the highlight of what you did.
It's weird because some of the highlights in a weird way are actually like tragic stories, but it's an honor to cover the biggest news of the day or the biggest news of the country. And so you're not glad it happened, but what you're glad about is that if it's going to happen, that you are given the privilege or the opportunity to be trusted with the coverage. And so with that being said, I was one of the first reporters at the scene of the tragic Sandy Hook school shootings, massacre, whatever you want to call it, which was just devastating and the hardest story I ever had to cover emotionally, continually for 5 days straight. I also then covered the Pittsburgh synagogue shootings. I was literally one of the first reporters on that scene as well. And so it's kind of weird this day and age that there's so many shootings happening across the country that, the same reporter can be one of the first reporters on the scene at both. But I think that's happening more and more often actually across the country. So, I mean, I hate to call those highlights, but they were, I guess, career milestones or, opportunities, or whatever you want to call it that stand out. But in addition to that, there's also some moments that are, I'm proud of the big awards that I've won. Anyone who tells you that it's all about awards is wrong, because there's so many good reporters who just don't even apply for awards because they don't want to waste their time. And I totally respect that. And there's reporters far better than me who haven't won awards. So it's not the end all be all for sure, but sometimes it does matter. And sometimes, it's deserved. And so the awards or something that I actually am proud of because it took a lot of hard work and stuff like, to that nature. And then also, like I said, to bring it full circle, I always wanted to be a sports anchor and I never did that. But I did get the opportunity because the news directors knew that I knew a lot about sports. For a layman, I guess, or for someone who wasn't a sports reporter, that I did get sent to cover many, many sports events, fortunately. And so I got to cover my hometown Pittsburgh Pirates in the playoffs in 2015. Our sports reporters were all sick or injured or something in 2016. And I got sent to actually legitimately cover a Pittsburgh Penguins versus Washington Capitals playoff game as the sports reporter, be in the media box, everything, which was awesome. And then sort of a news sports hybrid story. I was sent to the White House in 2016. 2016, right when Obama was there, to cover the Pittsburgh Penguins championship celebration. And then also again in 2017 when Trump was there to cover the Pittsburgh Penguins championship celebration. So it was kind of cool to go to the White House twice, which I'd never done before. And just so many highlights like that I can't even think of, but those are what come to mind. So, it is a career almost unlike any other where you just get such cool opportunities that, a lot of people will never get. It does come with a price though, which is, really bad hours and, working on a lot of weekends and holidays, for a decade of your life. But, for some people it's worth the trade-off. And for me, at least for those 10 years, it certainly was. And it might be in the future again, too.
Well, Beau, I want to respect your time. We've been on here probably longer than both of us anticipated, but that's kind of how this goes. Like you said, we could talk for hours. And I think the one thing that I want to talk to you again about in the future is storytelling, because clearly that's one of your fortes, and all we did was scratch the surface with that. But with that said, it gives me good enough excuse to reach back out to you, and we'll do this again.
All right. Yeah, no, sounds good. We can always talk about that. And there's a lot to say about it. And love what you're doing with your course and everything, and just putting out the education out there and paying it back and helping, paying it forward and helping the younger people in the business. Cause we all know that someone helped us at one time or another. And, it's all about putting the content out there and letting people be able to consume it. So yeah, keep up the good work. And thanks for inviting me on.
Sure thing. I appreciate you, Beau.
Take care.
And thank you for checking out this channel. If you found this content beneficial, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone you think might find it beneficial as well, because this channel was simply started and created to serve you, to help others grow, to learn how other successful TV journalists do or did it. So take what serves you so you can get better faster and reach your next level.